This is Stephen Sarro from Unteachers, and you're listening to Discography Discussion.
You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 157, Today is the Day, with Stephen Sarro of Unteachers.
I mean, I'm totally being sarcastic about it, but...
Hosted by Dan Terry.
The worst thing I'm doing here is chewing bubblegum.
And Joseph Wren. You don't know what you're missing out on. Presented by discussmetal.com. And if you think today is the day because the newspaper said so, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. Stephen Sarro returns and brings us Today is the Day.
Because who the hell else would do that, right? From the past.
I am calling you out. This is your origin story. Because every batshit insane thing I've ever heard you do, talk about, or reference can be traced back to Today is the Day. Can't it, Stephen?
I'll give you some of that, but I'll tell you, I guess what would have been the quicker thing would have just, since Steve has played with so many people, I probably should have just called him up and said, hey, do you want me to play in your band with you? I'll play whatever.
I can play guitar.
Might have
I
been
can
more
throw
successful.
I can throw toolboxes down the stairs, like whatever you want.
Yeah, man.
You're like, here's my resume. I set a pig's head on fire for an album cover.
I can add another hour to Sadness if you want me to.
Please don't,
Oh, fuck.
because I'd have to listen to it just to check it out, and I'd be like, God.
Oh,
And then you'd probably say something like, yeah, it's not really as good unless you listen to all of it from the beginning. Don't just skip to the last hour.
oh my gosh. It's a long listen. It's a tough one.
It
For
is.
sure.
We will get into that in due time.
Well, before we talk about the silver tongue of the Black Dahlia, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at discussmetal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
You know, I kind of like 5-star reviews here on this podcast. It boosts the self-esteem. It doesn't boost the bank account, but that's okay, because as long as I'm happy, I can be broke. It's fine. But hey, in all seriousness, I just want to thank everybody that shares the episodes with their friends and families, that you are pushing this on people that maybe want it or don't want it. But what I love to see is all those shares, all those comments. You guys are awesome, and I really want to thank all the people that contribute to our Patreon every month. That's huge.
Yeah, I don't personally do that, but everyone else should. Well, I'm a cherry picker, so I pick the bands that I know anything about, so I don't hear everything you guys do, but I definitely skipped the Linkin Park episode or whatever it was, or was it Limp Bizkit? I'm trying to remember. Didn't you guys go through like a phase of
Yeah. Well,
okay.
every May that. we talk about new metal bands. So
why May?
New Metal May. It's just the way God intended it.
Okay.
We got a tweet from a very good boy in regards to episode 155, Life in Your Way, one of my favorite bands from the early 2000s. I didn't listen to Hope's Fall till a lot later. Sorry, Dan.
Well, that's okay. Nobody's perfect.
We got a tweet from AC in regards to episode 142, Ginger. I dig this band and have since I was first made aware of them. I think that's everybody's review of Ginger, AC. Tatiana can sing and growl with the best of them. I was hoping you guys would be into them more, but you gave your honest opinion. Cheers.
Well, I don't think that we disliked Ginger necessarily. I mean, I enjoyed listening to their stuff quite a bit. I think we were just kind of on this thing of it's really cool, but what separates it from a lot of the other bands that are out there that do kind of the same thing? And that's unfortunately one of those snags we run into a lot of the times on this show. A band can be good, but it sounds like we're shitting on them even though we're not really shitting on them.
And in the case of Ginger, it's the most recent album that is their sound. It took them a while to find it, so they're not really as big of a deal as everybody says they were. back in the mid-2000s. They're not really an innovator when they showed up to the party late. One more. Marcos Aramisar on YouTube commented on episode 56, Scar Symmetry. Kind of surprised you guys generally thought Phase 1 is their weakest. Personally, I think it's the best so far. Can't wait for Phase 2. Most likely this year. Most likely indeed. Love your podcast, and I'm subscribed. Cheers. We thank you very much for that. I think we all had a different opinion then than we do now, but we'll see what happens on Phase 2.
No, it's definitely true. A lot of these bands do grow on me over time. Like, we'll do the episode, except Demon Hunter. They have not grown on me at all. But there are a lot of bands where we'll do the episode, and then 3 months later, I find myself listening to it just for fun. So that says a lot.
So, Stephen, tell me about Today is the Day.
Well, yeah, they're just a band that I discovered in the mid-90s and just fell in love with, and have all of these years later they're still that band for me that I still get excited about and never get tired of listening to. And to talk about them in this way, like their whole discography, which is something I never really do, you kind of have to approach it sort of like two ways. There's like two different Today is the Days. There's the band Today is the Day that started, and just all three guys, for 2 albums at least, who were coming from a more, art rock side of the world, punk, whatever you want to call it, noise rock, all that stuff. And then you have Steve Austin and Today is the Day, like his continuing that. So, obviously they were more successful after the original lineup, like when they got on Relapse and all that. So I would say probably 80% or more of their fans are post the first lineup. So it's a weird thing to talk about, because I could talk about something that's been out the last few albums versus the first album. It's just like a completely different conversation, which is what makes it interesting. So yeah, they're just a great band, and Steve Austin is a real creative guy, and just keeps plowing away. So,
well,
what do you guys think?
One thing that blew me away about Today is the Day is that how extreme they were for 1992, in the sense that they weren't a death metal band, they weren't like a hardcore band, but there's elements of both of those things kind of in their sound. And what I thought was crazy was just, number one, the extremity of the vocals. I love the way the voice sounds, how just like putrid his extreme voice can be, and just like cutting and like legitimately sounds angry. Because you know how like in a lot of metal these days, it's just a guy doing a voice.
Right.
This isn't really that way. This is like a vinegar dripping, anger type of vocal. And it actually conveys more emotion than I think maybe even they intended it to.
Yeah, I remember album reviews early on saying there was a lot of talk of the heaviest part of the band is the vocals, which is kind of like when you listen to them, that's definitely plausible for sure.
Yeah, I mean, back then, I would imagine reviewers had no idea what to make of this band. Right. Yeah. Because they don't play a specific genre necessarily, and they don't have a formula at all. Right. And one thing I want to say up front too, because again, we're going to get into a discography that's like literally never repeats itself. And the fans are kind of divided between the original Today's the Day and Steve Austin's work after that. One thing I want to say up front, because there are hits and misses for me throughout this discography, but the one thing that keeps me coming back is that Steve just refuses to repeat himself. And, the band's constantly changing, and you have to respect him, for not trying to repeat himself, and for kind of the work ethic part of it, of just getting shit done, you know what I mean? And working with what you have and who's there to work, and not worrying about the past and is this going to be as good as this last album I did? Just kind of just being like, here I am now, here's what I have now, and this is the best I'm going to do right now. And sometimes that's great, and other times for me, I don't connect with it as much, but I have to respect that part of
the post original Today's the Day.
Well, I think the best way to approach it is to just get right into it.
1993, Supernova.
Yeah, man. Great record.
Next.
No mistake.
No. This record is killer, man. This is one of my favorites for sure. Just for the simple fact that, number one, the vocals are kind of the heaviest part of it, although I would argue and say maybe the bass is. But I think with this record, it was so heads or tails, and the first time that I listened to it, I didn't really know what to think about it. But what I couldn't get past is kind of there were massive riffs in here, and some more focus, I think, on like creating an atmosphere, creating kind of this like really discordant sound that doesn't really settle well with you. But then, like I was telling you off mic last night, Stephen, it's kind of like they'd take you down into like this abysmal place, but then like lift you back up. Like it has almost kind of a melodic, positive vibe to it.
It's totally there's a lot more melody to these earlier albums. I mean, when I say melody, I mean he's not necessarily singing clean vocals, but there's something to his. It's not so much like a metal scream as more of like a yell that can be very melodic, and I think there's a more of a musical, pulling from more musical things, not so much strictly a metal in the earlier stuff. So I can see what you mean by it. I mean, when I look at the lyrics to those albums, I don't think about uplifting or bringing me back up to anything, but I do get a sense that there's a lot of, self-empowerment, or which I think would make sense why they would call an album Willpower. It's just, this idea that, you can't count on anyone but yourself, and let's make this shit happen. That sort of a vibe I get from them in the early days. Yeah, and Supernova is great.
My question is, what was the goal with this first record? Is this like a Tool thing where they're trying to create an atmosphere? I can't believe it's coming up again on an episode Steven's on, but is it a Captain Beefheart thing where I'm trying to lead the band into this atmospheric style of just play the instruments, it'll be fine as long as we're playing together, there's no worry? Are they trying to capture? Because I can't think of another band in 1993 that sounds like this that wasn't just a straight art piece.
Yeah, I mean, you have the three guys in the band then, Brad Elrod, the drummer, Mike Carell, bass player, Steve Austin. So, again, there wasn't a Steve Austin and Today's the Day kind of thing happening. It was three guys who were young and angry and, full of piss and vinegar, and they had a lot of stuff in their life they wanted to get out through music. And I think, and a lot like, even the stuff I've done in bands like this that have like a power trio that don't really attempt to rip off something specific, but it just the element, there's so much musical influences coming from so many genres, that it just sort of becomes a mess in your head, and something just comes out. Also, the fact that these guys were playing constantly back then, the three guys were practicing like 7 days a week, literally, so they were just a powerhouse of, the thing I like about this Supernova is, like, if you didn't know any better and you listened to the album, you would think this sounds like an experiment in a studio. But what's so crazy to me is that apart from some of the, artistic interludes or weird experimental tracks in between, the actual heavy music they're playing sounds exactly the same live. And obviously there's layers to some of the vocals and all, but it just somehow you don't miss that when you hear them live during that period. Like, if you can, I didn't see him during Supernova, but I've seen plenty of footage of it, and it's just there's nothing pretentious about it. All the ballisticness and craziness about it is like, it feels like the lyrics and like the music is all kind of coming from the same place, and it's like this expression that's coming out of them, and it just, I don't know, it's like the real deal. And seeing them live, that footage of them, I mean, it's amazing that you go back then and listen to this album and you go, well, you know what? This is actually just the band being super tight and playing really well together, and that's just what came out.
So this is a power trio. This is three guys making a really big noise.
Yep, totally.
And the lyrics
They've always
to
been
me,
a three-piece.
The lyrics to me sound more like a stream of consciousness than anything else. Like, it's not necessarily like I would say that the lyrics probably in comparison to the music, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like the lyrics were there just to convey a certain emotion more so than to have a specific message or idea behind them, you know. And again, that could be that I could be totally wrong about that, but it seems to me like the lyrics like had maybe, I don't want to say the least thought put into them, but the least amount of like crafting.
What I notice about this era of the band is, you know, I think people could very easily say, oh, they're like a progressive rock thing, or they're math rock, or they're trying to be very technical or whatever. And I actually think that technicality of them, or that vibe of the what do I say? What's the word I want to say here? The dynamics of the band, I think it's just coming from like the whole package of feeling. Like I think like when the way Brad and Mike play as a rhythm section is so completely unique, and I've never heard a rhythm section like it. And I think all of what they're doing I don't see them standing in a room going like, how technical can we make this song? I feel like it's like an outburst of raw emotion, and it just happens to be, that's just like the shit that comes out of them. And that technicality coming from that is what impresses me. Not that there were three guys that were like, you know, we listen to Cynic and Death and all these, you know, technical metal bands, but they really, to me, the tech sounds super passionate is what makes me love that album.
It's three guys
in that
who are
lineup.
in sync with each other, who are able to get in a room and just make music instead of writing music.
Yeah. You know, a perfect example is there's a part in the album where the lyrics, Steve Austin's kind of like over and over again, he's like almost like yelping this line about it's okay, I'm fine. You know, wait, what is it? What's the lyric? I'm just drunk. Say lies, tell everything, say anything, or you know, he's saying tell lies, say anything. I'm fine. I'm just drunk. It's like this rambling off that he does, and you know, why is that in a song? Well, getting to talk to the guys. Apparently, Mike's dad was drunk one time, and he said that to them, like as they met him for the first time. Say lies. Say anything, you know, tell lies. And they were just like, what the hell? So they were just thought there was made such an impression on them that they threw that on in the album. And that's what I'm saying. Like, there's something real about this album that's not just like, I'm trying to be technical, or I'm trying to be weird, or I'm trying to be, it's just, I really feel a sense of like just creative, raw energy from life.
It just
That's
is.
what I love about it. It just is. Yeah. The album is extremely layered. I've listened to it since 1996. That's when I discovered them and I got into it. I've been listening to that album ever since, and I still find things in that album that I haven't heard before. And it's one of those albums that can so quickly be pushed aside as like noise or whatever. But it's completely filled. Every second of that album is filled with some detail that is just so good. And so I don't know. It's like when you listen to the album, you can almost, like I said, you can almost think it's like an experiment in the studio, and it's not. It's just they were just that tight, and you know, there were the artistic tracks in between and stuff. But you know, overall, I think you're hearing just an intense first album. Did you guys listen to the 7-inch stuff that came out right before it? The AMREP 7-inch.
No, I didn't get a chance to listen to a lot of the in-between stuff, so my familiarity is pretty much just the studio albums.
Yeah, they did 2 songs called I've Been Scared and Come On Down and Get Saved. You know, I would say I would lump them in with this in the same description of just, you know, sounds like there's a lot more people playing in this band than those 3 guys on this album. And it's not a studio experiment, you know? So, yeah, a great first album. I wish my first album was as good.
1994, Willpower.
So you know how I said on the last album that the lyrics sounded like just a train of thought, essentially? This album is more so. Like, if you can believe that, the lyrics are actually shorter, and you know, it's a stream of consciousness, and I'm okay with that because I can focus more on the music without having to sit there and be like, well, what's this song about? Because I do that a lot.
I think I know what you mean with the lyrics, because I've always, and again, it goes back to that idea of like, this just seems like something real is pouring out of these guys. But the lyrics to me always seemed really weird that they would go, they'd be singing, like there's a in My First Knife, he's singing, you know, this gorgeous kind of beautiful musical moment of, you know, morning dove, lift me up so high, I wish you were with me instead of far away. And then it just immediately goes into this insanity, and he starts yelling about, you know, something completely dark.
I want to crash, I want to burn, I want to drown, I want to die.
There's a lot of almost like a schizophrenia to it, and emotional, like I think, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I think this was an album that Steve was making when he was mourning his father who had died. So I think there's some of that going on in the lyrics as well. So yeah, it's you know, the thing about Willpower, I think it's everyone's favorite in terms of those who hold true to the original band. But what I love about it is it's kind of like where Supernova had the layers and the things like that. This one, they kind of just stripped it all out and just got to. It's very stripped down. It's almost like them playing live completely. There's not a whole lot of extra tracking, and it's just very guitar, bass, and drums. And I would say even more than Supernova, this one is absolutely the same sounding band live as on record.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would describe this record as much more visceral too, in the sense that the dark moments are really, really dark, and like almost just insane, like you're in the brain of a serial killer. And then you know, but then you have these light, happy moments, but they're not light and happy in the sense of like, oh, I feel really good now listening to this, because they're mixed in with this insanity. It really makes the quote unquote melodic or happy moments really come across as more creepy than anything else.
Totally. And you know, again with the rhythm section, you know, some of the work, I gotta say, Mike Harrell's bass work, I've never heard anything like it in my life. To this day, I try to wrap my head around some of the riffs he's playing. You know, there's times where he's not even like strumming his strings, he's just scratching the strings or doing harmonics and just making these weird sounds that just don't sound like anything you've heard before. And the idea for him to take a note in the direction he takes it, when Steve's kind of just shredding this huge riff over this piercingly loud riff, and Mike just takes his riffs in like a totally different direction, and it somehow just works. It comes together.
It's like a Tom Morello thing where you stop treating the guitar like an instrument and more like a piece of wood with strings attached to it.
Right. I don't know if Mike Harrell ever pulled the cord out of the jack and tapped the pickups or anything like that, but
can you say he didn't?
I can't say he didn't. That's right. But yeah, you know, the other thing is like Supernova had some improv jams happening on that album. I think at the kind of towards the end, there's a song there that's literally them just jamming, like just creating something on the spot.
The B side of the album is very jammy.
Mm-hmm. And again, this one's very just to the point. It's a tight 36 minutes, I think, and I love the production of it. It's so piercing. It's got this, I don't know, it's very bright, and the guitars are just like almost hurt your ears, but it works so well. And I do like that it's more melodic in spots as well. And it's their most musical album, I think.
This is my favorite of the classic Today's the Day records, and classic is probably the wrong word. I'm just going to say the older records, because this had just enough melody, traditional melody, that I kind of got a Mars Volta vibe off of it. So it was enough to not have to buy into the batshit insanity all at once, especially when you're listening to 10 records for the first time, for me at least. I think this one's the best of the older records.
I think it's probably the best. It's hard though, because every time I hear Supernova, I'm like, this is the best one. And then every time I do that for some of their albums, but Willpower, I would say, is the best in terms of, with that lineup, in terms of the fact that it's just so simple. It's like, meaning how it was made. Like they played so much that's just what was coming out. And even more than Supernova, they just got in the studio and they just almost played it like live. It sounds like exactly like a live band. Now, some people not knowing how they sounded live then may not even realize that. They may just think it's a great recording with layered this and layered that. But no, it's such a to the point and stripped down album. And so because of the fact that they were able to do something this good without tons of experimentation and extra things, going on, is I think what makes it a stronger record. Probably. It's hard for me to say, but one of my absolute favorites.
I think it's the best all around of the first three, at least, in that there's things in it that you don't have to be a certain type of person to enjoy. Right. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like Supernova, you kind of have to be a little fucked up in the head already. And, like with the amount of music that's come out since then, people come to expect insanity out of music. But, in this time, in this year, stuff that was extreme like this, a Death fan can't pick this up and be like, yeah, man, this is exactly what I ordered, because there's too much to it. Just down to the way the guitars are tuned, like the distortion that they use, and just kind of this like drier sound that they have. That's what I always jokingly called 90s guitars, where still impossibly heavy, but they're not going for heavy in a brutal metal sense. And I think that's really what sets a band like Today Is the Day apart, is that they have the ability to appeal to people that aren't necessarily into metal. Now, there are certain things that you're going to have to get used to, like more extreme vocals, but the vocals also are on this record are not as extreme as they were on Supernova. Maybe like in places they are, but it's not like the main vocal output. There's a lot more singing, a lot more melody, and it's all creepy and weird, but I could see like a more casual rock fan giving this a chance than maybe they would Supernova or even Today Is the Day.
I think it's a better entry level record for somebody who has never heard them from that lineup, for sure, because of the instrumental tracks and the weird, or the experimental tracks in between of Supernova, and just I think just sort of the way it's produced. But I think Willpower just punches you in the face right away, and it's kind of easy to listen to in a weird way, because there's nothing easy about it in terms of, I've been trying to figure the bass lines out for years. I still can't wrap my head around it. And it's not that it's crazy technical like King Crimson. It's just that it's so tasteful and odd and unique to Mike Corell. The other thing I really like about the album, I don't know how many of the albums they did this, but one of the things that I like, later on they change it to, his vocals on these earlier records are not like run through a distortion pedal. They don't have that kind of quality to them. What I like about these first few albums is that you're hearing a production trick where the vocals are breaking up in the signal, and that's creating a distortion. It's like I think what they did was they were using two mix boards, and they had a mic going into one mix board, and then they connected that to the actual album recording mix board, and they did some peaking of levels so that when he yelled in the mic, it just started splitting up or whatever. And I think that's kind of an awesome thing to point out, because later on you can really tell there's not so much of that happening. It's more simplified to a distortion production, and I really appreciate the sort of organic recording quality. This is the same studio that recorded Don Cavallero's I think the second Don Cavallero album, and if you listen to those two together, you can kind of hear similar production. No, I agree. Don Cav fans?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I didn't know it was all that complicated. I thought the vocals were just like really overdriven, and like they were overdriven, recorded that way, and then like turned down a little bit, but you still have that crackle,
the old school industrial effect.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of another band we talked about in December called Bile. The vocals kind of had a similar effect, whereas Bile, the vocals just sounded like that throughout, and those vocals weren't as extreme, but the production technique was very similar. And I like it. It sounds evil. I don't really have any other way to describe it, but it just sounds evil. It sounds a little otherworldly. Doesn't sound totally natural, and I like that about it. It kind of gives it a stark contrast to what could be considered by some people to be beautiful music.
1996. Today Is the Day.
Yeah, the self-titled third album. I should just preface for anyone who's never heard of this band before and might go and check them out based on what we're talking about. But so the original lineup, as we know it, is no more now on this third album. Mike Corell moves on for differences with each other, I guess. But before that happened, they went to Morris Sound Studios and recorded with Scott Burns, and they did a demo as the original lineup of what would become this album. And if you poke around the internet, or I might have even sent you the song, there's a song called Mountain People from this album, that they did record as the original lineup. So we did get a chance to hear what would have come next. And I say that because this is probably going to be the album that I'm going to argue with you guys the most on, because I think this is a masterpiece. I think it's brilliant. And it's probably one of the hardest ones for people to dig. I'm guessing,
I don't know that we're really going to argue about anything.
I'm going to
ask you, though, why is it a masterpiece?
I think it's really cool that that they were, their decision to record it themselves because they couldn't afford to go to Morrisound for their whole album, something to that effect. I think it's pretty cool that they just made this happen. They created this recording studio and did this completely on their own. Brad's drumming is arguably at its peak. This is definitely what he in his like top of his game era. Drum work he's doing on this is just breathtaking, amazing. And the to answer your question more specifically, I don't know where their heads were at. The idea of going, hey, let's just abandon the bass guitar and go with a keyboardist is a pretty ballsy move, I think. Not just like a guy playing keyboard melodies, but someone who had come from industrial music and was really good at creating sounds that were creepy. I don't know. It's like a nightmare. It sounds like an acid trip nightmare with the progression of those earlier records, but just with this weird. I think there's some scary moments on this out. Like where it's deeply disturbing, and you're getting a taste of what would come with Temple, but it's got this balance of the things we were saying about those first two albums, but with this weird industrial edge. And I don't know. They sound absolutely batshit crazy in every way. And there's just nothing like it. I mean, I've never heard an album like it, and I've never heard anything since like it. It's like it's weird lightning in a bottle thing that happened. And that's why I love it. It used to be my favorite album from them.
It is absolutely all of the things you just said. I don't think it's as ballsy of a move to abandon the bass player in this type of music. I think once the Doors abandon the bass player, it's okay for a rock band, especially this type, which is kind of progressive or just artsy. You can abandon the bass player and do whatever you want because you're going to get away with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if in my own brain, the way I would think, if during the Tantrum days when we were playing, if my bassist left, I just wouldn't think to do what they did to go, well, let's go in a completely different direction with a rhythm section that's a keyboard and a drummer. Just to me, I think it was a pretty bold move because they were, following up Willpower. You would think that they would have some pressure to maybe repeat that and to change what was at the time the only thing that people thought of today's they were those two albums. To just take it in that direction. It's the first sign of Steve Austin just is going to do what he wants to do, and he's not going to try and please his record labels. You know what I mean? So that kind of aspect of it's pretty cool. But ultimately, the songwriting's just there too. I mean, Mountain People is just great. I mean, it's just a great song. Bugs Death March, great song. Just things that they created together. The ideas of playing the kind of riffs they play with versus the drum beats they play. It's a very just completely unique experience, and I know they're going to reissue it at some point, and I hope that they do, and I hope that maybe they could add a little bit of low end to it, because I know that it kind of sounded a little thin compared to the original stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a weird transition record. And I usually love transition records. Like Clutch is like that. When Clutch transitioned from what they were to what they became, right in the middle there, they do that, self-titled Space album, whatever, and Elephant Riders, and that's like right where I want to be with bands. They're right on the transition. So
I found this record to be pretty horrifying in places.
Yeah.
Like really scary. Like, because I listened to a lot of these records real late at night, while my family was asleep, and I'm listening to them on the sound system, in my basement, and I'm just kind of entranced in it. But like all the lights are out, it's in the dark, and it's at one point I remember, I think it was in the middle of Bugs, one of my kids came up behind me and like tapped me on the shoulder, and I swear like there's now like a hole in the ceiling that's my exact outline. that I jumped so hard because this record just put me in a place of sheer horror. Like, and it's not even that it's necessarily meant to be that way, but there was something weird about the lack of bass. Instead of me just being like, oh, there's no bass, so it sounds thin, which is how I should feel. I didn't really feel that way. I kind of like it gave the record kind of this otherworldly sound, and it's just creepy, man. And like the lyrics are again almost like, you know, coming like from the brain of a serial killer.
That song, "She Is in Fear of Death," the way they keep stopping and changing into a different thing, and it just kind of keeps going around in circles, and it's just, and what he's singing on top of it, I completely agree. It's depending on the person, it could be a terrifying record. For me, it hit that sweet spot of just, I was listening to a lot of bands like Roadside Monument and, like I said, Don Caballero, and bands like that were kind of like math rock, but didn't have like the edge of metal to it. It didn't have a metal or industrial edge of any kind. In my brain, it's what I was wanting, but I didn't know that. When I finally, because I discovered Today's Day when they were playing for this album still, and I didn't see this lineup, but this was the last album that had been out before I'd seen them live. But when I heard them live and I experienced the live show and how intense it was and just so dark and heavy and just hit me at that right time, it was like I went back to band practice and was like, guys, this is what we've been trying to figure out. Like, we need to do stuff like this. And we were in a band at the time called KL Radio, and it was kind of like, Sunny Day Real Estate and Quicksand and stuff like that. And we were kind of trying to do more Roadside Monument type stuff. Well, I brought that self-titled album into the practice space, and I remember Rick was all about it, but the third guy we were playing with hated it. So naturally, when KL Radio broke up, it was like we were immersed in this band by that point. We were trying to play with the kind of insanity that these guys were playing with, and like I said, they were a very big influence on me. But yeah. I mean, who puts flanges on drums? I mean, I don't know if that's common. I've never noticed it. Do you do that, Joe? I know you're a production guy.
I've done it in the past. It's when you want to get that spacey sound and you get that slow, droning, open hi-hat slam going on. Throw a little flange on there, and it just goes left to right.
Yeah,
Dan hates
I love it. I don't think it's for everybody or everything, but just the production of the drums is just super awesome. It almost sounds like percussion at times,
Absolutely.
So, yeah, man, great record. I hope more people. I think it's really overlooked. I think more to the Relapse fans, and they should go back and really give that another spin for sure.
Well, let's go to the Temple of the Morning Star, 1997.
Oh boy!
Anytime you get a band like this who consistently puts out albums less than 2 years apart, I have to ask the question, are you just making it up as you go, or are you doing the Chariot thing where you sit down and just output an emotion and put it on tape and go out on tour? This band so far has given me that tribal tech vibe where it's just a group of guys who can get together and make music without necessarily writing it. I mentioned that in the beginning of the episode. Then we got to the Temple of the Morning Star. Somebody figured out how to make this into an even bigger deal than it already was.
Yeah, it's weird because I saw them live when Self-Titled was the last album they put out, but they were writing and playing stuff for this album. But it was like right in between. And they were actually playing here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because at this club called the Chameleon Club, they were there to get signed to Relapse, because Relapse is local here. And so that was a label showcase for them. It was a no-brainer to sign them. But yeah, the funny thing about it is, like, I never heard of Today's Day until I saw them during this, right at this point. And I thought they were like a pop punk band, because I had heard the band name. I went to see that band Vision of Disorder, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We went to see Vision of Disorder, and these guys were opening for them, and I was like, Today's the Day. It sounds like pop punk, like Saves the Day or something, or just some kind of, that kind of a band. And then to make matters worse, this particular lineup that he was using at the time, the drummer was wearing like nice dress pants, and he had like a dress shirt on tucked in or something, like, and then the other two guys were just t-shirt jeans with Chucks or something. Like, they were completely just normal. Nothing about them said this is Temple of the Morning Star material. And there was no sound check. So we're standing there kind of like, what is this? And as soon as they came in with The Man Who Loves to Hurt Himself, that sample, and then the ballistics that come after that, and I literally saw Steve Austin. I'm not joking at all when I say this. The dude was so like intense, like he would like lean into the mic like real, the way he would do his screams. His microphone went to the back of his throat and vomit came out of his mouth. Like he gagged himself with his microphone. There was slobber just running. There was like a puddle of it on the floor, and the sweat. It was all like collecting like a puddle underneath. That was the kind of insanity that this band was doing at the time. They were just complete wall of sound and just melted my brain. And that was what did it for me. And then Temple would come out, months later or whatever. But yeah, this one was the first one that I noticed was like, okay, they're really into Black Sabbath. They're really into metal,
I think that it is a completely disgusting record, and I love it. I mean, it's everything your parents were ever warning you about heavy metal music.
Yeah.
Like just completely depraved, ideas about the world. And like when I read the lyrics, like I don't know if they're sarcastic or not. Based on the previous albums, I'm going to say no, they're not. But in this case, I mean, this is where the band truly sounded quote unquote evil to me. And that's what I love about it, is that it's so like I use this term a lot, like on the fly songwriting, and it's not that they didn't compose these songs. Obviously they did. This is a level of songwriting that I'm not ever going to be capable of matching. And the concept that basically only 3 dudes made these sounds, like it is just like The Man Who Loves to Hurt Himself is probably my favorite Today's the Day song, just because it's so grime. Like I feel like this was their first like actual, we're gonna make a ball busting heavy metal album.
It was a little weird for me to take it in when it first came out, because I wasn't expecting, because I had gone back and listened to Supernova and Willpower before this came out, so I was getting into all that, and that was just where my head was at with them. So when this came out, I was like, whoa, this is like a metal album. Wasn't ready for like Today's the Day metal. And another interesting thing about this album is the drummer on it, Mike Hyde. I don't know what happened to him, but he only toured for a little while, and then Brad Elrod came back. I should have mentioned that Brad Elrod did not record on this album, so he's back in the band touring. So now we have 2/3 of the original lineup again, but instead of Scott Wexton, who played on Self-Titled, now we have this guy named Chris Reeser, who looked like the Hollywood portrayal of Jesus Christ at the time. He had like the long hair and the beard, looked straight up like Jesus of Nazareth. And he's up there banging his head to this music, It was a different album live than it was on the album, and a much more, I don't know. The production's really good. I love the production of it, but it doesn't give you that sense of like the front row of that show is going to get slobbered on. It doesn't give you that. And seeing them live during this was just like intense and scary.
I like this album from a production standpoint. It's the power trio making one big sound taken to the next level. It's also the first time I can really say, if you're not into this style of music, you are not on board. There's nothing here that's going to convince you to listen to it if you're just not into it. This is like the Mars Volta taken to a completely different level. We're creating this sound, this atmosphere, and you're going to buy into it, or you will not come to the show.
Or, just go kill yourself.
Yeah. I think that they were still finding an audience, obviously. And with so many changes they had already gone through for 2 albums, and going from Amphetamine Reptile to Relapse was because back then Relapse wasn't doing bands like Nothing and Torch and more mellow groups. They were just strictly like death metal and
grindcore death metal label. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So it was weird already that was the label that would put this out. So I think there wasn't really a real dedicated audience yet that was going to follow him, Steve Austin, onward. But I got a sense when I was going to the shows during this era that people were just like me when I first saw them. They had no clue who this band was, and I watched them go through the same experience I did, where I knew what was coming. That sample would come in, and they would just start going ballistic, and people were just stood there like, what the hell is this? And that was a general theme before for seeing. And I went to see them probably 1,000 times during this era. We would travel to see them at this point, and we were already doing Tantrum Muse, and it was just like a musical artistic marriage for me, you know. So it was when I finally met Steve and shared my band with him, and you know, we still talk to this day.
Yeah, I think the samples on this record like really cut through in a way that they didn't before, and are like, they start kind of fitting with the themes of the songs in a weird way, whereas I kind of felt like before the samples were just kind of random. And they can still seem that way.
Yeah, like the Chrysler.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Ad.
Yeah, really?
I don't know what that was about at all.
I know.
It was funny though.
But it's awesome. And like,
yeah.
I'm a huge sucker for samples in music anyway. Like, I feel like it adds so much. And, you know, in the case of this album, it was pretty much perfect.
And you know, the funny thing is with the samples, that's the one thing we didn't rip off this band with, because we actually got that idea to play samples live from a band called Dig Jesus, which was an alternative band.
That's a deep cut, yeah.
Yeah, right. Totally. Great band. But they kind of were in the Christian punk alternative scene with Scatter Few and all that. I saw them at Cornerstone, and they had tons of samples. We had samples on our demos way before we did Tantrum, on like Ruckus and all that stuff we did before. But again, when you see Today's the Day, it's like, okay, that's how you should do it. And these samples we had were stupid samples of like goofy things. These guys were doing like, you know, like that, like I said, that sample that opens Temple is just intense. It's like, The Man Who Loves to Hurt Himself. It's, you know, so it feels so serious. And it's like, man, we're gonna blow your mind with this. And that's what we wanted to do. So we streamlined our sample ideas for sure after getting into this band. But yeah, it was great to see Brad Elrod playing drums on the Temple song. I kind of wish he was on the album, but Mike Hyde's a good drummer.
Definitely.
1999, In the Eyes of God. This is the most tame record so far, and I use the word tame very loosely.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it tame, but I would say it's a slick record for them. Whatever metal was coming into it, this was where he fully embraced it. And I would say where Temple was a Black Sabbath album, and I say that almost, I mean, it's so obvious because they covered Sabbath Bloody Sabbath on it, but just if you even remove that, it has that sort of riffage going on, you know. With this album, I feel like this is where they were like, we're going to embrace our past of listening to like Napalm Death and Slayer and things like that, and more specifically a tried and true metal album. And I love this one too. I think this is a fantastic album. Real short and sweet, like punk rock, 2-minute songs, you know.
Yeah, I really liked this one. It's no secret that I'm a pretty big fan of grindcore and bands like Napalm Death and stuff like that. So like this really is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite, Today's the Day album, because it's like the record that they wrote that caters more to me personally.
I was going to say, I would think that, and the kind of show that you guys do, and you discuss metal, that's why we have the website. I think if I were to assume, I would think this is probably the pinnacle record for you guys, because of it really is like a throwback to thrash and death metal. And you know, the cover art. So when we showed up to see them live for this album, they had a giant banner of that cover art. I remember just being like, of course this is going to be the cover of the next album. But I never took the Satan stuff seriously. I know that's kind of like almost a homage to being metal, is to have the Slayer, you know, pentagrams and stuff. Not to say that Steve didn't have any dabble in anything serious with it, but it didn't upset my Christian values. And I remember they told me that it was done by Paul Booth. He's like a famous tattoo artist, and apparently that cover art was a sketch drawing. Like he was like went and like drew that in minutes or something, or like it was very fast, and gave it to Steve. Like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And Steve was like, no, that's all I need, and kind of just took it from there. So kind of a cool story about the artwork.
Looks cool. Thanks.
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah. But Yeah, it's a striking image. I love the red versus the silver and black from the past. I kind of like the art direction. And this is the pre-Mastodon today's edit. So the lineup we have here is Bran and Bill from Mastodon. So I forget the name of the band they were in before that. I guess that had broken up and they were about to do Mastodon. And Bill from Mastodon is playing bass and not guitar here.
Yeah.
So another interesting, and that's where I discovered these guys, because obviously I didn't know anything about what they were about before. But yeah, man, the song "Going to Hell," I should mention, is a cover of a song that Steve was doing with another band before today's day called "Alien in the Land of Our Birth." It was him and Brad's band, and that was more of an art rock, trippy, heavy band. Probably with some drugs involved. I'm not sure, but they did that song "Going to Hell" first.
Is it really a cover if you wrote the song?
It's right. It's a redo. It's a remake. But so Steve used that on this, and it fits in perfectly with this album. But it'd be interesting for people to check out the other version because it's very different. It's got a more almost more like a Jane's Addiction vocal style, or more of a trippy, art rock style. But yeah, it's the whole album. It just slays, and there's still a front and center artistic thing happening here. Like there's a lot of there's still, like, even though the thing became more metal or aggressive, there still was that artistic side in these albums. A lot of experimentation with the production ideas, and I love that they sampled. There's a movie. What's the name of that movie? You ever heard of was it Peter Greenaway? He's the guy who did the I want to call it The Thief. Man, I can't even remember it now. Hold on. Let me try to remember this. The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. Have you heard of that movie?
Heard of, never seen.
Yeah, it's a real weird art house film, but they sampled that in the beginning of going. That's what that choiry vocal is in the beginning.
Well, now we're going straight for the obscure. We're going for art house films that we already know people don't watch.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if you follow any of that stuff, and you can see, like, clearly there's still a weird creative process happening with today's. They weren't just like abandoning the past art stuff. It was just going in a different direction, but it was still there. It was that trippy psychedelic kind of quality was still there with the band.
Well, Stephen, if it was up to me, I would sample Beyond the Black Rainbow, but I can promise you that you would not like the ending. In fact, you would feel cheated and disappointed.
I gotta ask though about the.
I like it right worded.
I gotta ask about the art though. What was the artistic meaning behind Bionic Cock?
Well, Dan, I was trying to solve the food supply issues in the future. So once Leonardo has put the Pleasure Dome in place, we have to come up with robot chickens.
Okay. And at the end of this plan, we nuke the Earth from orbit.
It's the only way to be sure.
Okay. All right. Glad we got that out of the way. No, I love this album, and it's literally probably the most listened to that I had. Well, that's not true. I actually listened to a different album that we'll get to more than any other one, but it's not my fault. But yeah, this record is so heavy and so intense. And yeah, we compare it to like heavier bands like Napalm Death and stuff, but like the reality is that like, yeah, you're getting kind of this grind, almost death metal thing, thrash too, but it's still done with the same sort of approach that today has always had, in that you're getting so much more than just a standard heavy album.
Right.
And and then I don't know what the fuck is up with the next record.
Sadness Will Prevail in 2002. Disc X or Disc Y, depending on how you feel about it.
I loved that. I love that they titled it that way. It's very strange. Like, why didn't they just do the last two letters of the alphabet? Because this record isn't that kind of record,
What you don't know is that there's actually two more discs that were never released, right?
Yeah, they had the full alphabet, but they had to cut it down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to say that this is a favorite of mine, but I will say it's a completely split record. I mean, it has found its audience, and there are tons of people who think this is their best album, who just love it and just, will say things like, it helped them through difficulty in their life, I've seen guys on YouTube commenting, and saying things like, I put this on repeat. And it's a 2.5 hour long album already. So putting it on repeat's pretty intense. Like, so yeah, it's a tough listen for sure.
It really is. I mean, clocking in at 2 hours and 33 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm a simple guy, Stephen. I listen to records. I talk about them.
Yeah.
This was such an investment in my time. And so the first time I listened to it, I was like, okay, there is a Today's the Day album in here. Like, it
Totally.
is. There is an album here. But it's kind of like you were walking down the stairs with a grocery basket full of all of the elements that you need for a Today's the Day album. And then at some point you fell down a flight of stairs into the dark. And then you're just reaching around in the dark, grabbing those essential elements.
Yeah. I have 3 problems with this album. One of them is the production. I appreciate the rawness of it, if that was the intention. And I appreciate that it had I just appreciate the whole creative weirdness of this album. But sonically, I feel like because there are so many tracks that are kind of compositions, they're not really like songs. They're more like pieces of music that really just kind of are in like a loop, a repetition or
and
something.
Sometimes not music at all.
That's also true. But I kind of would have loved to have heard like the classical compositions that were on the album, like the bowing wind or string instruments and that kind of thing, produced really well. And the tracks, and there's some really awesome songs on this album, this double album. But I feel like if it had the production of even like In the Eyes of God or something where it was very big sounding, I don't know if I would feel it was a hard listen as much. Things sound very tinty, if that's a way to describe it.
Well, it
like
almost seems like a rejection of that big sound.
This was 2002, so you're rebelling against popular music, which was ending with nu metal and beginning with metalcore and hardcore. So what was this? The opposite of, we're going to make the record sound like it was recorded on a 4-track cassette machine?
In a dungeon?
It's interesting.
With the door open?
It's the first album with Chris DeBari on bass. And he's probably the longest running bassist that was in Today's the Day. He's on the most repetitive more albums. And he is my favorite Today's the Day bassist post original lineup. And it frustrates me that he did not get the chance. Now, he may not agree with this, but I'll just, from a fan perspective, he never got the chance to shine on record like he did live. Because live, he was nuts, and he was great. And this lineup was great. This group of songs was great. I saw them during this, right before this came out, and it was amazing. And like the song The Descent, when they play that song live, it was like nuts. But I was hoping that feeling I was getting would be on the record, and unfortunately, that was one of the strikes for me, was the production sound. The other thing is that this thing's too long. It's I think I can appreciate the pieces of music, but sometimes they're several minutes longer than they need to be. I hate talking like that because it's like I'm trying to cut down someone's artistic expression, but from me, the fan.
It's okay.
Listener,
we do it all the time.
Yeah, it is very long and hard to listen to. I know they mixed it on tour. What happened was Steve was going to mix the album, and then they got an offer they couldn't refuse, which was to go on tour with Motorhead. And it's a pretty good gig,
Good
to
choice.
Open up for Motorhead. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
Lemmy calls, you got to go.
Exactly.
Steven, you figured it out. The record was mixed to sound like Lemmy sings.
Yeah.
Better than my
from what I
previous
heard,
analogy, I promise.
I think what happened was, I think he was mixing it while they were on tour, like in the hotels or van.
And
It was
who
very
knows
kinda-
what he had to work with. Even if you have
Right.
a really good set of headphones, people that do it for a living say you should not mix with headphones because your ear canals cannot produce the acoustic space necessary to actually develop a mix. You work with what you have. So I'm sure those people that think this is the best record are appreciative of the length of the artistic expression. Here's 2.5 hours of this band that I like doing nothing the same. That's the reason you watch an art house film, because you're going to see what could be considered random bullshit for way too much time, and when it's over, you're going to tell me how great it was. I'm going to go back to Beyond the Black Rainbow for a second. Steven, it's not a good movie, but it looks really good for like 2 hours.
Well, a lot of, like the movie I was referencing, Peter Greenaway's movies are kind of like that. They're gorgeous, but they're really hard to watch sometimes. But and that's probably a good example with this album. I mean, and I don't mean to crap all over this record. I mean, there's a lot to like too. I mean, like I said,
sometimes random is good if you're taking it in a small burst. Give me a 35-minute grindcore record. I'm not going to be as happy as Dan is, but at least at the end of the 35 minutes, I'm going to tell you how great the grindcore was. 2.5 hours in, for the love of God, stop playing and get off the stage.
Right. Well, one of the weird things I think about, and I haven't really thought about it much until recently, revisiting this album, is how crazy it was that they followed up their most successful album with this. I mean, it's, again, it just continually goes to show that Steve Austin's just moving forward. He's not trying to repeat himself. And, big respect for that. I mean, I don't know if I would be able to take my band with an established sound from X amount of records and then follow it up with 2.5 hours, fill the entire disc up with sounds and music. And they're very proud of this record. And I don't mean to take that away from them, but, fans love it or fans just hated it. I don't think there was a real in between. There's no casual listener to this album. I don't think that is even possible.
Well, Steven, if anybody could do it, it would be you. I have faith in your ability to fill that hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, but the sample from American Movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that with the Coven. The guy was making his horror movie called Coven. The Paradise Lost samples. A lot of cool references to film and stuff in this album. I think Rosemary's Baby's in there at the end with the Hail Satan, all that stuff. But I don't know, some of the instrumentals, it kind of reminds me of like when Supernova, there was a couple weird things like Blind Man on Mystic Lake, or A Man of Science, tracks like that where they were just kind of like this, but they weren't 10-minute long versions, So yeah, I mean, I respect this album a lot, and I think it's the last time I felt this level of creative process with Today's Day, where they're not just trying to grind out fast songs, but they're really trying to do something experimental. At least that I miss a little bit from them, so I kind of appreciate it for that.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, I actually listened to this 6 times in the past 2 weeks.
All the way through. All
the way through. I mean, I took breaks, but yeah, the first 3 times were all the way through, and then I kind of grabbed it in like 25-minute to 30-minute increments. And it was mostly just me trying to get it.
Yeah.
Because I just felt like there was more to this than I was getting. And inevitably, after 6 listens, I kind of just gave up because I was like, it's just not for me. Maybe it doesn't make it bad, but I also feel like, to use an example that Joe uses, Captain Beefheart, I feel like this is a record that a lot of people listen to and will say that it's great.
Trout Mask.
Yeah, Trout Mask Replica.
Replica, yeah.
But I think it's a record that a lot of people listen to, and there's a lot of pressure when you've got these like avant-garde bands like this. There's a lot of pressure to listen to a 2.5 hour album and be like, oh yeah, that was great. But I don't think everybody that listens to it and says it's great necessarily gets it, but they want to be on the same team as the cool kids that do get it. And I think that's how a record like this gets universal praise, in that, and I'm not saying it's a piece of shit. It's not dog shit, but it's just too much.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to say it. It's too much of a good thing.
It's an endurance match. You're only listening to it and putting yourself through it because you can say you did.
There's a lot of songs that, even the ones that are real long and don't have singing, like the instrumentals, where I could hear them being really well-crafted songs with vocals. And I'm like, I think, my third criticism about it is that there's too many instrumental tracks where they're not actually singing and creating melodies with it. Those 3 things I think the greatest compliment I can give this album and I'm not even joking when I say this, and this really is meant to be a compliment. It's the only Today's the Day album where I have to constantly pause it to check if something is weird with my ears.
Yeah.
It sonically fucks with my head. There were times where I was literally feeling like the sound was like, because if you listen to it like in headphones or something, there's times where things in it, some of the chaotic moments, it made me think my hearing was going out on my left ear. And I would stop and I'd sit there and click my fingers I'm like, my ears are fine. Like, what's going on? Push play, and it keeps happening. I'm like, wait, this has to be the album doing this to me.
Some asshole's got the pan control, and they're moving it just 1 inch to the right and moving it back over just to fuck with Stephen Sarro.
Maybe the van was just taking some weird turns when they were touring, and he was mixing it. He's like, oh, shit, it's okay. I put it right back in the center. It's okay now.
I mean, if the guys are listening, seriously, it's a really awesome record, and it's like eating 5 pieces of cake more than I should have. But love the creativity of it. I love that they got Chris Force, who's a awesome musician. She's in a band called Amber Asylum. She's the one who's doing a lot of the string arrangements and the female vocals on that. I don't know if you've ever heard Amber Asylum, but they're really cool too. So yeah, there's a lot to like, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's a very well thought out artsy project, but there are moments when I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, come on, guys. Like, you know, and again,
get it over with.
And again, I listened to it 6 times, and if that wasn't enough times for me to get it, then I'm just not going to get it. And it's probably my fault. But yeah, I mean,
it's definitely not for everybody. That's for even hardcore Today's Day fans. It's not for every one of them, for sure.
Absolutely.
So
2004, gentlemen, it's time to kiss the pig.
Oh man,
you guys seen Black Mirror?
He didn't kiss the pig in Black Mirror. I don't think he even called the pig the next day.
Well, once again, guys, we have another lineup.
Yep.
Stephen, I appreciate the consistency in the band name and the overall theme of let's create something chaotic and awesome. This is at home in 2004. I think everything before this could be considered avant-garde, insane, batshit, whatever you want to say. 2004, when people are getting into hardcore and metalcore, this fits. It's just mid-range enough. It's mixed like a solid hardcore release. I think this one fits in. Not as good as the previous records, but I think this one kind of stands with it.
Minus the production, I think this is the record that probably would have made more sense following up In the Eyes of God. Just, I don't know, just obviously the speed metal aspect of it, the grindcore. I know they were going for like an early Earache Records type stuff, like with those more raw sounding, you know, the overproduced part of it not being here was definitely an intentional thing. And, you know, the drummer on this is, you guys ever heard of Circle of Dead Children?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the drummer from that band. His name's Mike Rosswald or something like that. He's like a grindcore drummer, like through and through. And I guess a good thing to say about this album is that if you're looking for that, it's there in droves. I miss a bit of the dynamic elements that were up to this point front and center, you know. Because even on the last album, like, you know, with the heavy stuff, it seemed like maybe Steve was just picking up a mic and singing however he sang. There wasn't a lot of layers or stuff. The drum work was still pretty dynamic. The bass stuff was pretty dynamic. This one's really straight up just like blast beats death metal. And apart from Steve's vocals, I don't know if you would notice this was Today's the Day.
Well, this is good if you're a fan of this style, but
how you doing?
In the overall scheme of Today's the Day and what they do, there's a reason you don't turn it up to 10 and leave it there, but they decided to leave it there for this one.
Yeah, I mean, and again, there's lots to like about it, for sure. I love grindcore and death metal and like blast beats and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's like, let's hear some crazy, like noise rock death metal, you know. But, I think for me, another thing is just I don't think the songs are quite. I think I lose interest about halfway through, about two-thirds of the way through. I'm kind of like already done with it, and it's already kind of a short album. The thing about that kind of music is I can't listen to hours of it. You know, it's like I almost feel like I need it for energy. I just want to put it on and just freak out for a little bit, and then like, all right, I'm out of breath now. cool. I got my fill. I'm done. And I'll switch to like Enya or something. But I'm kidding. But yeah, this one, it's a short record. It's very simple, but I find myself a little bit tired of it before it's over.
I appreciate its overall straightforwardness. And, I think that, like, production-wise, I think this album slams. Like, it's exactly what you would want if you picked up a Relapse record release.
Totally.
Like, it checks all the boxes. And, you might say, oh, well, that's just them kind of bowing to what the label wants. But, like, I don't think that's what it is. I think sometimes you just want to write a record that works. And I think that that's absolutely what they did here. It's missing maybe a little bit more of the avant-garde stuff, but that stuff is still in there. Like, the elements are still there. Again, it's not like a straightforward grind release or anything like that, but it is much closer to that than they've ever been. And but one thing I noticed is that the lyrics were a huge step up on this album. They were much longer. Like, the songs all have, like, I don't know, there's like 18,000 words for each song. It's still very, like, stream of consciousness, but, like, it seems a little bit more sincere. Like, it doesn't sound as much like just random shit is being thrown out there just to be shocking. Like, these songs actually go somewhere,
Yeah, I do appreciate it in certain moods that I'm in, that I can just, like, get blasted in the face full speed. And Steve Austin, he's moving forward. Not a repeat of the last album, and it's very, he's kind of like the sound at this point. There isn't like there hasn't been enough consistency in the lineups for it to be a real band effort, and that kind of starts to show up on these records for me. And Steve is, like I said, if his vocals weren't there, now granted, Chris's bass work's awesome. I love the power, kind of like power chords almost on his bass, and it's real heavy, real distorted and heavy. I never got to see him live during this album, and I kind of wished I did, just to hear if it would just blast my face. Like, the music's just so fast, but and I kind of missed just that loud volume, But yeah, I don't know. The dynamics are lacking for me. I definitely appreciate what you're saying with the lyrics. I think the artwork's pretty cool. Like, it was some artist in Japan that they were touring in Japan, so they got that art. I don't know what it means. I don't even know what "Kiss the Pig" means, but
I don't think this is a step forward, though. Statement. Once the dynamics are gone, you've gone as far forward as you can go. You're to the point where you're just playing fast, loud, and you're not giving the music any room to breathe whatsoever. To me, that's a downside for the band as a whole, but it's an upside if what you're looking for is a straightforward release that doesn't require complex bullshit thinking to appreciate.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying is you have to look at the context of this. This came after a 2.5 hour album that
came
was
out
anything.
After Any Eyes a Guy.
Yeah, that was just.
Man.
Yeah.
It's a strange decision, but it's cool.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I totally understand why it's this way, because you can't just, I don't know, you can't do Sadness Will Prevail again. If you do, I feel like you've lost everybody. And, you can have nothing. You can have nothing but focus after putting a record out like that.
Yeah. When I say it's a move forward, I'm strictly referring to the fact that he's not trying to repeat himself. And so whether it's a less dynamic record or it's 10 times dynamic, it really just comes down to he doesn't really give a shit that everyone tells him to go do another Willpower and go do another Temple. He clearly doesn't care about that. And I think that's respectable. And it, at this point, if the band's not going to always be what I want it to be, that whole like pigeonhole your favorite band or whatever, then I want to appreciate it for just being completely not what I'm expecting and completely different and being who you are now and not who you were then. I'm kind of glad Steve's not the guy he was in Temple of the Morning Star. I'm kind of glad he's not writing songs like Kill Yourself. I kind of want to see a guy who's now a family man, which he is, and he's like showing, his where his life's at on each record, and I can appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what's so funny about that, but
I mean, if the definition of family man is what this album sounds like, then I don't know if I approve of your parenting style.
No, I had a feeling.
Everybody come upstairs in time to eat dinner.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know how old his kids are, and I don't know if they were born yet, but I wasn't saying where he's at now is where he was at here.
It's where you took my brain, Steven, not where the album went.
No, on this album, like the artwork is just like him and Chris with like face masks and machine guns and stuff. Like, I think Steve Austin was recording weapons for other media.
Oh,
like
we're moving on to Axis of Eden.
Like that. Yeah, well, Axis of Eden. But I'm saying on this album, like the artwork, if you look at the artwork, it's just loaded with them holding guns, and you hear that little in the beginning. So.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so 2007, we're going to embrace the gun thing, and that becomes the album cover.
We are in the conservative right-wing era of Today's the Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Sarro presents the conservative right-wing era of Today's the Day.
I don't think I'm not saying that is that what they were. I just got a vibe that Steve might have been like not a liberal.
See, I'm looking at the track listing for Axis of Eden, and I am personally convinced that this is the Today's the Day version of a protest record.
Maybe. I think Kiss the Pig might have even been some of that, though.
Kiss the Pig definitely was, but I don't know about
that
this.
That might have
record.
been what the title was for. If there was any meaning for Kiss the Pig, it might have been a political statement. So, just guessing.
I mean, I definitely don't get a whole lot out of the lyrics as far as like, again, and I'm not saying that Steve's lyrics don't mean anything. They definitely mean something to him, but it's not one of those strict like, oh, this is what the song's about kind of thing. And that's one of the things I like about Today's the Day is the lyrical output is also artful, especially later in their career, more so than in the early stuff, which makes sense. I mean, people get better at things and start trying to put a little bit more into what they're talking about without it having to have some like overt message, you know?
Yeah. I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on all of these albums because I'm trying not to. I have my problems with a few of them. It really always just comes down to either the production or the drummers. I mean, a lot of the time. And I might be somebody who's trying to pull him back in the past a little bit because, like, when you're spoiled with guys like Brad Elrod and Brand from Mastodon, it's hard to listen to this album and listen to what's his name, Derek Roddy from Nile or whoever. I think that's what band he was in. To hear him playing, I could be wrong. I think there might have been a schedule issue and they kind of got him last minute, and that might have been some of why. But it just, to me, it sounds like he's watching Steve for the changes, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Like he's kind of like bass drum snare hi-hat very simply to like try and follow the weird. It doesn't sound like he knows the song, and until they start blast beating, and then of course he's amazing.
It absolutely sounds fantastic. Like somebody is following somebody else, whereas the previous records sound like a group that is in sync and is creating the sound together.
Yeah.
You can't follow when you're the drummer. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I've been asked to do it, and everybody said it sounded like shit.
The problem I'm having with this, I think, the more I'm thinking about it, is that there's either blast beats or no dynamic drum beats. And there's nothing like no good fills, no good vibrant drum work. It's just very wooden or just completely batshit crazy fast. And
it's a far cry from the art rock type of sound that they had before, where you're getting these drummers in that are just like, okay, so I'm in a heavy band. I heard the last record. Let's just blast.
Gravity blast. Yeah. Gravity blast.
Right.
Go.
Because
go.
That's what, relapse record bands do.
Yeah.
And, and I think with a band like Today is the Day, you just don't really, that's not really necessary for what they're throwing down. It's great for the more extreme and intense parts. Obviously, you need a drummer that can keep up with that. But whenever you've got a guy that's used to just blasting, and it's like, well, that's all I got to do is just blast on these heavy parts. Everything else is just like I can kind of phone it in a little bit. And I think that's the biggest issue that I really noticed with the drumming on some of the later stuff where they kept swapping drummers out, was that you'd get some that were like, get it, like understand the vision, and then there's other drummers that are like, yeah, I'm just here to blast. I get paid 18 cents every time I blast,
This is the first record since Relapse. This is now not on Relapse anymore. This is independent. I think he started Supernova Records, and I think that's on this, if I'm not mistaken. But I think there was a falling out of some kind with Relapse, because I think the song on here, Broken Promises and Dead Dreams, I think is the title. I think that song is referencing the relationship with Relapse, which is why I think he yells Relapse over and over again. But if I remember correctly, I don't know the full story of this, but I think Relapse repackaged Sadness Will Prevail, and they cut it up and they made it into like a one album deal, and they kind of butchered it, which I totally disrespect, because I think regardless of what you think of that album, it was how he wanted it to be, and I would have been crazy pissed if that was me. So this is no longer Relapse. This is independent. Today's the day. I should also mention he's been recording every single one of his albums up to this point, and definitely improvement, these last two from Sadness, but I'm still feeling like I'm not getting that, like, the sound that I want to hear. You know what I mean? And when I first heard this album, I really was let down with it big time, but I kind of like didn't really revisit it much, which is weird because I revisited it recently now to talk about it, and I actually find myself liking it a lot more than I did. And I think the reason for that is when you're coming from the other side of it, all the experimental stuff and all the mathy stuff and all that, and the changes become not necessarily dynamic, but more whatever you want to call these things. It's hard to understand. But then when you get to the other side, where you look back at now, he's done so many different albums that never repeated each other. You can kind of go back a few albums and listen to it with new ears, and that's kind of what happened here with me. I'm finding that there's actually quite a few songs on here that remind me of some of the other stuff. And the first song reminds me of something from like Self-Titled or something, or definitely closer to the Temple era for me than the other ones were. But I have my problems with it. I do have problems with some of the songs, like Circus Maximus. There's a couple songs in here I would not have done, but.
Well, I think
whatever.
that this is probably the most creative album that they've released since Sadness.
Yeah.
In the sense
it's
that...
It's definitely more creative, for sure.
And it's more in the spirit of a traditional Today's the Day. And, like it has to be that. Like, we're pissed at Relapse. So we're not going to put out something that's for those people. Like, that demographic.
It's way more experimental than I realized. Yeah, I agree. I'm glad. And I kind of wish I had I don't know why, I just wish I could have noticed that more before, but I definitely want to continue to see if this grows on me more, because I find this is a much fresher album for me than Kiss the Pig, for sure.
Well, yeah, and it's really just that, we've done a lot of discographies, obviously, on this show, and this is the kind of trend that I notice with a lot of bands that last this long, get to like the 10 album mark or 8 album mark, is you have your landmark releases. That's what makes you who you are. That's where you get your identity from. And that was pretty much them from Supernova all the way to Sadness. Yeah. And then you get into the Relapse Records era where, they're basically going on tour with these super brutal bands, and they're kind of writing music to accommodate that, to accommodate those fans and all of that. And I'm not saying that those records are bad or that they're not creative. There's still a special quality to a Today's the Day release. But, once you get independent, you're calling your own shots. The only thing that you have left after all of that is that identity that you built on your own from day one. And so, of course, you're going to see them trend back towards that. They're not repeating themselves. I don't think Axis of Eden sounds like, Sadness Will Prevail, or it doesn't sound like Supernova. But you can tell that the same creative mind is at work. That same clock is kind of ticking behind it. But it's been a while since they've done something like that. So it's not going to hit necessarily the same way because, number one, you've got different blood in the band. And, two, you're just kind of getting back into that, like, well, what can I do to make this more me? And so, I mean, as a longtime fan, you might be disappointed that it doesn't sound exactly like those old albums. And I don't mean that it has to sound like them, but it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the exact same creative flair, but you can tell that they're trending in that direction.
they're definitely doing something a little bit more experimental, and I can definitely appreciate that. And I think that's kind of, man, that's what makes this next record so frustrating to me, because it's like another like jolt in a different direction, because now I'm like, okay, they're starting to get a little more experimental again. Sadly, this is Chris's last record on bass too, I should mention. I wish he was still playing with them, but great dude. And this is the departure. This is now officially like Steve is going to have new people completely. And I don't understand it. I don't understand why the next record went in the direction it went compared to this. It's very confusing.
Hey, Dan, does this hurt?
What hurt?
See, he's not paying attention, or that would have went smoothly. Hey, Dan, does this hurt?
I'm sorry. Am I really not paying attention?
He's trying to make a pain as a warning joke.
I'm going to try it a third time, and I want to see what happens, okay? You ready? Hey, Dan, does this hurt?
Yes.
You know pain is a warning, right?
Oh, okay. Warning. Oh, God.
2011. Yeah. Steven, I like this one. So I'm interested. Why do you not like it?
Because his expectations exceed reality.
Hey, no. I'm not saying I hate it or anything.
You're the most qualified person in the room to dislike this.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. Well, okay. So they recorded with Kurt Ballou from Converge, who owns God City Studios. So now Steve's like, hey, I'm off the reins of this. I'm giving the reins to you. You do this album. And I love God City Studios. He does High on Fire. He does Torch. He does a lot of really beefy. I think he did Mutoid Man.
Torch is so good.
Yeah, man, totally. So this was kind of like, okay, cool. I want to hear what Today's the Day sounds like with the Kurtz treatment, which was awesome. And there's some cool songs on it for sure. But this is probably my least favorite, because it's just the band, the rhythm section. It's the rhythm section. I feel like this is where Steve's playing with like millennials or something. I don't know. I could be wrong. They just seem like they're younger, and they didn't come up with the same level of quality of music as Steve did and as we've done. And it just, I don't know what the deal is, but it to me, it just sounds like he wanted to do like a straight up rock and roll album, which is a bizarre, again, I appreciate that he's honest. I appreciate he's moving forward, but this one does not resonate with me.
So this one sounds like a standard run-of-the-mill hardcore record.
I don't think there's anything hardcore about it. I think like that song Wheelin', that's Motorhead. They're just rocking out, and they just wanted to try and simplify and just rock and not be anything but that, and just really, and again, stepping back, looking at the whole discography and going, like, there's an album where they just wanted to rock. It kind of, on paper, sounds like a great idea. I don't know. I lose attention with this one, and I think I would have loved it more if, here goes the D word again, but if the dynamics were there. And I don't like the rhythm section on this album, and I feel like it held it back, which is a shame, because the production's awesome. I mean, it sounds great.
Well, as a millennial, I will say that...
I didn't realize you were, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I know, I got a lot of gray hair, but it's all just from stress, I promise.
You're like right on the line of millennial.
Yeah, well, I was born in 86, so yeah, I mean, I still fit that.
Literally
fit that
the
mold.
Definition of the line.
Yeah, well... I really liked this because I thought it did sound different than what we'd heard. You like comparing the discography, because they don't repeat themselves at all, ever. So I didn't really expect this record to sound like any of their previous material. And, I disagree with you when you say there's nothing hardcore about it. It's still pretty fucking hardcore.
The second track is awesome.
Yeah.
Love
so, I mean, they definitely go for the throat. But I like it. It strangely enough, it does remind me of Converge a little bit in places. And, in my eyes, that's not a bad thing. The mixing, the production, it does sound very different than what you're used to with this band. But I thought that this was the breath of fresh air that they needed. Yeah, just my 2 cents.
I think I get that, and you have to remember, when I say I don't like an album, what I'm really saying is, even a record that would be quote unquote a bad Today's the Day record, which I'm using serious quotes with that. it's still an interesting thing to listen to. And it's because Steve is just one of those people who has there's something unique about him, about his style and the way he plays and the choices he does with the style of his vocals, So it's like, it's almost like, to me, it's like talking about The Cure. It's like The Cure. There's people who say there's some really shitty Cure albums, but to me, a shitty Cure album is still like a great record to listen to. This one, I'm not as passionate about this one. If I had to rank, if that's what the game we were playing here, I'd probably put this at close to the bottom, because it's to me, I can appreciate the rock and roll side of it for sure, and I can definitely appreciate the vocal work and the production. But I think I would have liked it a lot more if the drummer and bass player were a lot better, to be completely honest.
Is this the least creative Today Is the Day record in your
without
eyes?
A doubt. Yeah, and I think it was intentional to just not worry about that and just, like I said, just rock. I think the Motorhead tour must have really influenced some of that for sure. And I can respect that for sure. It's just,
Well, I mean, this is some time after that, but yeah.
I mean, the cover art, I don't understand the cover art, and I'm kind of picky about cover arts too. That's the other thing. Like I'm always like wanting to see how albums are packaged. That's kind of part of the opinion that I form on albums, and I don't quite understand what I'm looking at with that album cover. I like the title of the album, and the reason I like the title of the album is because I know that Steve's son is who named the album, and I think that's really cool, because he was talking to his son or something, and he'd said that pain is a warning, like to try and relate that I understand how that works, and I think that was really cool of him to take that and use that as the title. If anyone didn't like the title of it or thought it wasn't like some big epic thing like Temple of the Morning Star, I think it had a lot of meaning because of where it came from. So that's another thing to really appreciate about the album.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the name was like really in line with kind of what they had done before, to be honest. Like, everything doesn't have to be Axis of Eden or, or anything like that. It's a lot better than a mind is a terrible thing to taste. Stupid. But anyway, I think it's one of those titles that really encompasses what the band's about. I mean, they pretty much talk about pain exclusively, throughout their discography. And so in that sense, it's very thematic. It works. It fits.
It's kind of like, if you didn't get the message up until now, we're going to just say it. Warning, danger. 2014, Animal Mother.
I like this one. It's a step in the direction of both better production and experimentation and an attempt to be somewhat dynamic. And again, there's things to say that I might not like. I think the bass player is kind of a stick in the mud on this one. But I think the drummer is a bit of an improvement. I saw this tour live, so I could say too, like, to see it performed, I can say that the bassist seemed like I couldn't even really hear him, and the drummer seemed much better live than even on this album.
I don't dislike this record, but in the grand scheme of this band, this one sounds the most like I have a new band and they're trying to tailor new music to what I've given in the past. It sounds like the only person that knows what's supposed to be going on is the person doing the vocals, but everybody else is just trying to keep up.
This record's kind of sad. Like, and I don't mean sad because like it's a Today's the Day record, It really was about, kind of the death of Steve's mother.
Yep.
And that really shines through on this record. Not in a good way, it's I mean, I don't mean that, like, it's not in a good way in the sense of, like, it's not necessarily relatable hurt for me, but I definitely can get right down there with him, when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you there with the sadness and that it's a good theme for the album. It's something that I respect, and even, I don't know, I want to say enjoy it, but I like that he was able to take the pain from that and make music with it and share that kind of stuff from his own life on albums. It's not easy to do. For him, these songs are probably extremely personal, And yeah, it is a bummer, and it's kind of weird because it's like, his dad was sort of a theme on the Willpower era, so he kind of lost both parents and had a creative output with this band, which is kind of an interesting thing as well. But
yeah. This is the most coherent lyrical output too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. It's hard because kind of what he's getting at, but at the same time, he doesn't like drown it all out in like a bunch of metaphor. Like you pretty much know what he's talking about. Like he says, that goddamn phone call. Do not try to bring her back. Her body and brain pain is increasing at a rapid rate. Like I mean, it's right in there. It's
heavy for sure. There's a lot of substance on this one for sure, and that's another reason why I like it, because it's I don't know. I don't want to say his other ones weren't as thoughtful, but this one's like very thoughtful, and it has an intense theme behind it, and then you have the fact that it sounds good, and the fact that it's more creative, more dynamic. There's that word again. There's some really weird tracks on it. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Masada? Is that how you say that? Masada?
I don't know. Masada sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a step where I was hoping they'd go with it and continue to go with it for sure. This album was the album where they had that horrible car accident on tour.
Oh, tell me more about that, because I don't know about that.
They were in a terrible accident. They should be dead, and they were, by the grace of God, their lives were spared. But they were very badly bruised up, and Steve had some health issues from that car accident, that van accident, I should say. And yeah, he had a lot of suffering because of that. But that was a very difficult time for the band because of that, and just the challenges that they were facing because of all that. But I'm glad I got to see him live before that happened, for sure. This is the first time I'd seen him live since probably like Sadness era. So it was really cool to go out again and in small room, big amps, just like the past, and just enjoy hearing them again. I haven't heard the new album yet, but even further into the right direction, I think. It's another sounding record from them that isn't repeating. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, not much more for me to say about it. I love the artwork. I think it's really good looking. I love the packaging, and yeah, I feel like everything's constantly different, and there was a little bit of a weird dry spell for me, and these last two seem to be, or this last one rather, seems to be kind of like turning that corner into some more creative stuff. So I'm all for that. That's what I like most about Steve's work.
So needless to say, you're pretty excited about the new album that's dropping this month then.
Well, I want to say, as I can't review it. We can't review it. It's not out yet. It's probably going to be out in like 2 days, but here we are recording
after this post,
just
probably,
yeah. But Steve released 3 songs from it. There's another lineup on it. I don't even know who they are. There's some interesting dynamics on these songs too. The production sounds really heavy. They sound heavier than they have in a while. The tone they get on this record so far that I've heard. But the thing that I'm most excited about is Steve recently did some interviews for this album. And in this interview, he talks about what I was just alluding to with the car accident, and how much health issues he had faced. He's just gone public with this, that he had gotten Lyme disease and he was crippled, majorly, like he was unable to do anything to take care of his family. He was just literally laying there in pain. I think he had 2 hip replacements because of the accident. There was just a lot of bad health stuff in a row that really knocked him down. For a while there, he felt like, how in the world am I going to ever do anything like I did before? I, being somebody who has now had 2 back surgeries in a month, apart from each other, and I'm in that exact spot right now where I feel like, quote unquote, no good to anyone. Like, it's kind of what the point of the album is called. Just
that resonates so much with me to see that he's on the other side of it now, and he looks healthier than ever, and he's defeated that, and he's gotten stronger. And the fact that he was even willing to connect with me and give me the advice to focus on being stronger and to trust that things are better and to not be so laying around in constant panic and all that, it was just like such a personal thing for me to have an album that's going to resonate with my life from Today's the Day, probably for the first time where I really am like connecting to the message in years from their work. So I'm really excited about it because I need this next record lyrically. I think for me, just still not being out of the woods yet with this issue I'm having. Yeah, I am really looking forward to it, and I'm hoping that that it resonates more and more with me. And now that I understand why they called the album, you can hear the title "No Good to Anyone," think it could be just sounding like a depressing title, But now I know that title means he literally felt like he was useless. He couldn't even take care of his family. So that is hitting me big time, and I am really excited to hear it.
Yeah, I am too, especially after listening to all these records and getting kind of prepped. I'll feel way more qualified to talk about it than I would have if we hadn't done this episode.
Final thoughts on Today's the Day. Dan.
Oh, man, I mean, where to begin? At the beginning of the episode, that's where you should begin.
Rewind.
Right. No, I think Today is the Day is one of the most unique bands in heavy music in the sense that they don't follow any trends at all. You can't pigeonhole them into any specific genre. They just go all over the place, and they're one of the most creative bands out there. And even the albums that we nitpicked, it's just nitpicks. Like, overall, you're going to have a pleasant experience, except maybe with Sadness Will Prevail. But again, that just, maybe I'm not a cool kid and I just don't get it. If you get it, then great. But really, I mean, beyond that, I don't think that they've ever had any real missteps as a band, as far as like what the fans want and delivering that, but also keeping the artistic integrity. So, I mean, if you haven't checked out Today's the Day, you've got plenty to go back and listen to. And I think you're going to find something to enjoy in it, even if you don't enjoy all of it.
Yeah, totally.
Stephen Sarro, what the actual fuck? And why did you make me listen to this band this week? Because I'm glad you did. I haven't listened to Today's the Day before. Every time I find a band that's kind of out there or kind of random or does things a little differently, usually I add them to the list of bands that no one else has heard and people aren't expecting. The list is short for me, but I have my favorites. I think Today's the Day fits the mold of the avant-garde rock band, but what you said in the beginning of the episode is definitely true. They don't repeat themselves, and they don't really deviate too much from their overall theme. Even though a solid straight rock record is not really their theme, they never went pop. They never added verses and choruses and bridges and guitar solos. They just kept the theme of this sound going forward. The sound is what the band delivers. And if you're into that, you are going to like Today is the Day. Most people are going to not like Today is the Day. Steven,
my mom
final
won't
thoughts.
Like them. My final thoughts is this. There's a little bit of a Today's the Day for everybody, even your mom. No, I mean, I'm partial to the first 5 albums, and more specifically the first 3 albums. And there are lots of people, more than you would realize, that would say that about Sadness Will Prevail, Kiss the Pig, all the things that I may not have been as interested in. But at the center of all of it is a guy named Steve Austin who's constantly creating and pouring his heart out into music and creating these albums that are always interesting, whether they're right up my alley specifically or not. There's just always some reason to always buy the album, put it on and listen to it and support him. And there's nothing else like that band, or nothing else like Steve Austin, I should say. And he's still going after a lot of trial and error, and and he's still making really interesting music. And I think that's worth listening to, no matter what part of the lineup you like or what part of the timeline you like. I think there's something there that you can enjoy.
And what's your album of the week?
Oh man, you know what? Totally hit me broadside on that one.
How many times have you been on this show?
I constantly forget that you're going to ask me that, though. Oh my gosh. I've been converting a lot of demo tapes over lately and sort of not listening to music. You guys can go ahead. Sorry.
We'll come back to you, Stephen.
Dan, what's your album of the week?
Well, my album of the week is actually The Search by NF, which is a band or a rapper that we're going to be talking about soon. So, I've just been really into that. I don't listen to much hip-hop, and I don't even know if it's good hip-hop or not, but you'll just have to listen to the episode to find out.
Steven, what about you?
Well, I think the most recent thing I've been listening to is this band called White Lies. I just recently discovered them. This album called To Lose My Life. It's been pretty cool. I like that. I've been listening to a lot of Today's a Day, honestly.
Haven't we all?
Ditto.
Yeah, I've been enjoying revisiting some of the ones I haven't really listened to more recently. And so I would say, lots of Today's a Day.
My album of the week is Unteachers, a human comedy. Not because Steven's here, but because I legitimately went back and listened to it after listening to all these albums because of the accusations made in the beginning of the show. And I was not disappointed by the atmosphere I was given.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Everybody go buy a copy of Unteachers.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, you just got them on CD, didn't you?
I did. I made a human comedy available on CD. If anybody wants to go on the touristtrap.bandcamp, or no, I'm sorry, touristtrapmedia.bandcamp.com. You can get them there, vinyl and CDs.
Steven also has a podcast called The Tourist Trap that you can check out. I think you've still got the episodes up on Patreon, right?
Yeah, I got 3 seasons on Patreon. I'm working on a 4th season, which I haven't done in quite some time. I just took a couple years off there, but I kind of got in the mood to do it again. So I'm working on some new episodes. If anybody knows the format of it, they'll know why I'm saying it like that. Like, it's not a week-to-week interview type thing. It's more of a musical experience. So
absolutely,
definitely check it out. Yeah, it's on Patreon for free, and download them there and tell me what you think.
Take us out, DFT.
If you've ever been listening to this podcast and you thought, man, they just spent an hour talking about a band that I have never heard of before, they should talk about this band that I have heard of and think that they need to give the treatment to. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can reach out to us on Facebook at facebook.com/discography discussion. Reach out to us on Twitter at discussmetal. You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you want to talk to us in real time, you can check out our Discord server. There'll be a link in the show notes for this episode that will take you to the wonderful world of Discord and all the conversations therein. We also have a fillable form that's pinned at the top of our Facebook page. If you click on that, and there will probably be one in the show notes, there is a band suggestions form that you can fill out and send those suggestions straight to us.
And on that note, this has been episode 157 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Oh yeah, perks for money.
Yeah.
I was saving the psychedelic lights for the end of the show, Steven, just for you.
That's awesome. Yeah, it looks great.